Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
This time last week, Jeremy Corbyn was in a pretty good place. He put in a decent performance at PMQs. The Tories were ripping themselves apart over the EU referendum, and any Labour rows seemed, well, small beer in comparison. But that was before the Guido Fawkes political blog uncovered anti-Semitic tweets from a novice Labour backbencher called Naz Shah, made before she was an MP, and Ken Livingstone called Hitler in her aid. Perhaps not the most helpful of modern political interventions. This led to his suspension from the party, along with Smith Shah's, and calls for him to be drummed out entirely. So what might have been no more than a little local difficulty has become the biggest crisis in Mr. Corbyn's leadership. Here's our Ellie with a reminder of how the story unfolded.
I accept and understand that the words I used caused upset and hurt to the Jewish community, and I deeply regret that. Anti-Semitism is racism, full stop.
Naz Shah was apologising for this, a Facebook post that suggested Israel be moved to the US. She'd shared it and other offensive comments 2 years ago. On Tuesday afternoon, she resigned as Parliamentary Private Secretary to the Shadow Chancellor John McDonnell. But the story didn't go away, and the next day a fellow Shadow frontbencher was calling for the Labour whip to be removed.
There has to be a suspension and an investigation when something like this occurs, because it is so serious and it does have such a knock-on effect on people outside of Parliament in the real world.
Moments later, the Prime Minister waded in.
The fact that, frankly, we've got a Labour Member of Parliament with the Labour whip who made remarks about the transportation of people from Israel to America and talked about a solution and is still in receipt of the Labour whip is quite extraordinary.
After hours of speculation, Naz Shah, who was only elected last year, was suspended from the Labour Party pending an investigation. But if the Labour leadership had hoped it would draw a line under the issue, they were sorely disappointed, because the next day, this happened.
You didn't find that to be anti-Semitic?
No, it's completely over the top. It's not anti-Semitic. I mean, let's remember, when Hitler won his election in 1932, his policy then was that Jews should be moved to Israel. He was supporting Zionism, and his boy went mad and ended up killing 6 million Jews.
You Nazi apologists. You Nazi apologists. Rewriting history. Rewriting history. Rewriting history. Go back and check what Hitler did. Go back and check what Hitler did. There's a book called Mein Kampf. You've obviously never heard of it.
Ken Livingstone was on the phone to another radio station when he got interrupted by the Labour MP John Mann. Watched by most of the country's media, they took it inside and continued their interesting difference of opinion on the daily politics.
And you dare say that Hitler supported Zionism? You've lost it, mate. You need help.
I think you've lost it, Mr. Livingstone. I think you need some help. It's a deliberate, calculated attempt to cause problems, to stir up hatreds. What are you on at the moment? Right. You certainly shouldn't be on Labour's national executive.
I've not said that Hitler was a Zionist. What I said was his policy in 1932 was to deport Germany's Jews to Israel. That doesn't say I agree with it.
John Mann was called to the Chief Whip's office for that and told he shouldn't have big rows on the telly. Other MPs voiced their opinion in Parliament instead.
Anti-Semitism is wrong, full stop, end of story. I am sick and tired of people trying to explain it away, and yes, I'm talking to you, Ken Livingstone.
Less than an hour later, Ken Livingstone was suspended from the Labour Party and chased by the media.
Do you want to apologise for causing any offence?
Do you mind if I have a wee first?
While Ken was indisposed, Jeremy Corbyn was trying not to let the issue occupy his local election campaigning, even if he had been forced to suspend one of his closest allies.
It's not a crisis. There's no crisis. Where there is any racism in the party, it will be dealt with, be rooted out. I have been an anti-racist campaigner all my life. I suspect that much of this criticism that you're saying about crisis in the party actually comes from those who are nervous of the strength of the Labour Party at local level.
But it has been a damaging week for Labour, whose leadership promised to get a grip on anti-Semitism. Ken Livingstone insisted he had nothing more to say.
I'm going to got to do the washing now. I'm doing some work on the pond, moving some of the newts. That's my day. I'm not making any statements or doing it.
Ellie Price reporting. Well, Ken Livingstone didn't stay quiet for long. In fact, yesterday morning he appeared on the London radio station LBC for another interview, and he was still unrepentant. After the broadcast, he had this to say to the TV crews outside.
If people have been offended, I am really sorry about that. But they're not offended because I said the truth, exactly the same thing as the Prime Minister of Israel said 48 hours earlier. They've been offended by this group of embittered old Blairite MPs stirring up all these accusations of anti-Semitism when, as I said on the programme, 80 Labour Party Jewish members have a letter in The Guardian today saying they've never experienced anti-Semitism. We've had a handful of people who have said things that are anti-Semitic. They've been suspended or expelled immediately by Jeremy. But bigots don't join the Labour Party. It's filled with people campaigning against racism and anti-Semitism.
Speaking on BBC One earlier this morning, the new Israeli ambassador to the UK, Mark Regev, said a line had been crossed in the anti-Semitism row in the Labour Party.
Of course people have the right to criticise the government of Israel. Israeli citizens do it every day. I mean, if you follow the very vigorous public debates we have in my country, you'll know that every government position is open to debate in the parliament, in the press, in a very, very robust civil society. It's not about criticising Israel. It's about demonising the Jewish state. I mean, the comments we've heard over the last 2-3 weeks that were made public, it's got nothing to do with criticising this or that particular Israeli policy. It's demonising and a vilification of my country and its very right to exist.
But Jeremy Corbyn's close ally, Diane Abbott, told Andrew Marr that Labour doesn't have any more of a problem with anti-Semitism than other political parties.
The reality is that there have been 12 incidents in the period when Jeremy is leader, and some of those remarks predate Jeremy being leader. 12, 200,000 people have joined the party. Ken was suspended within hours.
And what's your message to him now? Should he apologise properly?
Have you ever known Ken apologise for anything?
No, but this might be a good time to start.
Yeah. Ken's remarks were extremely offensive. He was suspended within hours. There's going to be an investigation, and, you know, the party will decide what happens to Ken.
Well, the Sunday Politics asked the Labour Party for an interview with somebody from the shadow cabinet, but it turned out in the end no one was available. We're joined now, however, from Exeter by the former Labour Culture Secretary, Ben Bradshaw. Mr Bradshaw, welcome to the programme. In your view, how big a problem does Labour have with anti-Semitism?
Well, in a week when the Conservatives are doing terrible damage to our education system, to the National Health Service, they're tearing themselves apart on Europe, I would not want to be on your programme on Sunday talking about this. In a way, I agree with Diane Abbott. I don't think we have a massive problem, but the way that we've mishandled this whole crisis, which has been going on now for weeks, not just in the last week, although Ken Livingstone has done his best to try to make it worse, the way we've handled that crisis has made it seem much worse than it really is.
What do you make of Ken Livingstone's claim that this is just basically a group of, quote, embittered old Blairite MPs trying to undermine the new order? And I assume he'd probably include you in that.
Well, as I recall the events of this week, one of the first people to call for Ken Livingstone to leave the Labour Party was a certain John Landsman, the head of Momentum, and on the hard left, and one of Jeremy Corbyn's close confidants. And I think the popular left-wing commentator Owen Jones was also very quick to call for Ken Livingstone's resignation. So to try to describe this as some Blairite looks far more like a sort of left-on-left battle. But no, I mean, I'm increasingly of the view, Andrew, that Ken Livingstone is a Conservative Party spy who's been planted in the Labour Party and has been sleeping and has now emerged to try to do as much damage as he possibly can to the Labour Party. And that's certainly the view of my loyal Labour Party members and activists and voters who came up to me all day yesterday saying what is going on. They were outraged by his comments. If he comes back into the party, they won't vote for our party. It's a really serious issue. Jeremy has finally gripped it this week with this inquiry, but we have to act quickly and decisively when something like this blows up, not let it drag on in the way that we have.
So has Mr Corbyn let it drag on?
Well, there have been very sensible voices across the political spectrum in the Labour Party who for several weeks, if not months now, have been raising concerns about this and calling for quite simple and sensible solutions to it. I think if they had been listened to earlier and if action had been taken earlier, we could have nipped this problem in the bud, but it hasn't been gripped. I hope it's now finally being gripped after the Livingston fiasco this week, but it will be judged on what we do. Parties are judged on what they do, not on what they say. We've said a lot of good things. The leadership have said all the right things. We now need to see action.
What is the difference between Ken Livingstone's attitude to Israel and the Jews and Jeremy Corbyn's attitude to Israel and the Jews?
Well, I'm not quite sure I'm qualified to comment on either of their attitudes to Israel and the Jews. All I know is somebody who has always been a very strong friend of Palestine, a supporter of a two-state solution. The Labour Party has a very proud tradition of believing and supporting in Israel as a state with the right to exist. But I think there is a problem on parts of the left. They don't seem to recognise where legitimate criticism of Israel and of Israeli government behaviour crosses over into hatred for Israel and anti-Semitism. The Labour Party supports absolutely Israel's right to exist. We always have, and I hope we always will. We also support a Palestinian state. And if we allow ourselves to be diverted from that sensible position, which is held by all progressives all over the world, that would be a very, very dangerous path in my view.
Are you clear in your mind that Ken Livingstone and Jeremy Corbyn support Israel's right to exist?
Well, I can't speak for them, Andrew. I can just speak for myself. I'm not inside their brains, and I think anybody who tried to get inside Ken Livingstone's brain after his behaviour over the last few days would find that a very challenging process.
So you're
indeed.
you're not sure that your leader supports Israel's right to exist?
The Labour Party and Jeremy Corbyn, I am sure, 100% supports Israel's right to exist. But, you know, these are questions that the leader can speak for on behalf of himself. I can't speak for him.
No, and chance would be a nice thing, Mr. Bradshaw, but we are grateful to speak to you. So let me ask this. In your view, I know there's a due process to follow. Should Mr. Livingstone be expelled from the Labour Party?
Well, as you say, we have to follow due process. All I would say to you, Andrew, is that countless loyal Labour Party members and supporters came up to me on the streets of my constituency in Exeter yesterday, where we are fighting very, very important and very tough local council elections on Thursday, to say if he came back, they wouldn't vote for us.
If he was to be brought back, what do you think the reaction would be among your colleagues in the Parliamentary Labour Party?
I think they'd be dismayed. You know, there's genuine anger from the top to the bottom of the party about the damage that this has done at a time when the Conservatives should be on the ropes. We should be 20% in the opinion polls. We're behind. We're facing very difficult local elections. The Conservatives are in a civil war on Europe, and we're not being an effective opposition because the talk is all about turmoil in Labour. Labour people are furious about that. They want the leadership to get a grip. They want us to be an effective opposition, and they want us to make sure we win the next election and next Thursday's elections across the United Kingdom and in London.
Ben Bradshaw, thanks for joining us there.